Hello, well today I'm doing some shoe lining. So last left these shoes I've stitched together the back and the front in each case, but not across the middle. What I'm doing now is I'm basically going to do lining inside. And I've got some very nice leather for the lining, a nice bit of thin 1mm veg tan. So don't want anything too thick, but there'll be enough strength on that to make it give the shoe a bit of body really. So I'm going to cut out the bits, and basic aim is to line the back, line the front, and then join the shoe bits together. And there are one or two little fiddly bits along the way which are straightforward, but little bits like lining the tongues. Because these are Oxford shoes. If they were Derby shoes, the tongues would be sort of included in with the front vamp, but as Oxfords, they're separate. So I'll get underway and get some cutting out done. Well, I'm cutting the back of my shoe as one piece, and I'll cut the front as one piece. I need to use a bit of scrap lining for reinforcing around the eyelets, so that would be quite a good little bit. The tongue pieces also use up smaller bits, so I can try and avoid wastage as much as possible. So I'll have the flesh side of the lining in against the flesh side of the inner of the shoe, so the smooth bit of the lining, the top grain will be facing inside the shoe. It will look smooth. If I was making something like slippers where you want them to keep on your feet more and want more grip, some people I know use the flesh side facing so that it's out, inside the shoe but externally visible, and then the foot is rubbing against the flesh, which is the rougher side from the smooth top grain side. But with a shoe here I'm going to keep it so it all looks nice inside as well. That's marking quite well. It's a faint line, but it's enough for me to be able to see it, to put a knife round. Finding the weight, having some form of weight on your work is really worth doing. Yep, be able to see that. So do the same for the other back piece, and then I'll do the same for the front piece. I did cut out some patterns for my lining, but actually I decided I'm going to just try this approach and see how it goes. This is so thin I can actually just cut it with scissors. I was going to use a clicker knife, but thinking about it, scissors will be perfectly good and easy on this. Oh, it cuts beautifully, so no problem there. And then what I'll do, even though it is 1mm and that's all it is in thickness, I'll skive the seams where I'm sewing the two halves of the shoe together. Well, at the moment I'm just skiving around a couple of little rectangles, and that's basically to feather this edge down to nothing, because these are going to be my eyelet reinforcers. So what I want to do with the eyelets is have it so that they don't show on the outside, but they are there. So I mean, if I look at the shoe that I've been taking apart, you can see there aren't eyelets there on the outside, but on the inside there's a whole row of eyelets. And it just looks, I think, a bit more sort of sophisticated not to have the eyelets showing on the outside. So what I will be doing is gluing this reinforcing piece to the lining, and also gluing it to this outside leather as well. But I'll put the eyelets in, I'll punch all my holes, and I'll put the eyelets in so they only go through this reinforcing bit and the lining. So that's what that will be about. But it's a way of getting the benefit and the strength of eyelets without actually having them showing on the outside. So anyway, I will carry on. So I'm just again marking out on my front piece, so the vamp and the toe piece, and just going around with my scratch awl. So I'll cut this piece out in the same sort of way that I've done for the back of the shoe. So it's essentially it's two main components, the back and the front, with all of this. So I've got the tongue linings here, and I don't want that upper edge to particularly sort of scream out with the shoe. So what I'm doing, I've got some leather dye in one of these Montana markers, and I'm just going to go around and darken off the edge. I'll do the same with the sort of inner lining of the shoe again, just so it doesn't scream out. And it does quite a good, quick, neat application. So these Montana markers, if you just pump them a little bit by pressing on the nib, it forces the dye through under a little bit of pressure. Obviously in this case I don't want it over pumped, because I just want to do the outer edge, not the face of the thing. But very good, very useful. Put the lid back on and that keeps very well. Ordinary Fibings leather dye in there. I've just been skiving down these seams where I'm going to be joining, so that the lining in the shoe, you don't sort of get the abrupt edge. It's going down literally to a feather edge. In fact here I've almost done it too much to a feather edge. But and same thing here where the seams are joining in the middle section of the shoe. I've again skived it right down to a paper thin edge, just so that again as your foot goes in it's not going to hit this lining as a ridge. So that's all done there. Done that on the skiving machine. Obviously you could do that by hand quite happily. So I'm now just putting my lace holes in the outer piece of leather only at the moment. Then I can mark through and punch through for the lining leathers. So these are spaced at about 12 millimeters. 12 millimeters apart. So I've just marked on my liner where the lace holes are, and I'm going to glue this reinforcing strip onto that area. Then it'll have like extra body to it for the eyelets. So I'm just going to hammer on the reinforcing, having put the glue down. So that piece now has the two reinforcing bits for the eyelets. So I'm now just placed the outer over the inner, and I'm marking my eyelet holes. So I've had to line this up fairly accurately. So I'm marking those in next, and then I'll be able to punch them out and put the eyelets on the thickened lining. Oops, don't like to hit metal on metal. And then I can take my eyelets, put them through and fix them. So the eyelets I've got here are little 1/8 of an inch ones, they're quite small. And I have a little anvil and stake to apply them. And they've got little collars to anchor them down. So the little collars go over the top like that, and then I have a little stake pin, goes into the anvil, and I tap it down, and that gives me a very tidy, neat little eyelet. So I'll just do the other ones, same sort of approach, line it up with the anvil. The little pin and anvil for fixing these eyelets are particular for the size of eyelet. So what I end up with is a nice little row of eyelets there. I'll do the same to all the others. So I'm now going to stick the lining to the back here and obviously get it very much over the eyes, get the eyelet part lined up well. I'm only going to be sticking the top edge. So I need to leave space underneath to get my stiffener, my heel stiffener in. I may glue this area when I come to join them, but at the moment I'm just going to sew along, glue and sew along this top edge, so around the top of the back and the top of the quarters. So I'll just put a thin bead of glue all along and let that go off. So this is where my lace holes are. So I'm doing probably about 6mm of glue, something like that. It's not a lot. And I'll do this on both surfaces. It's very hot here today, so things are drying pretty fast. I tend to put a bit of paper on my desk when I'm gluing, and it stops then. The glue just goes on the paper. So at the moment I've sewn along by the lace holes and all around the top, and that's all that's holding the lining in at the moment. But it's sort of looking vaguely shoe-like at the back end there. And I'm quite pleased as I look in, and that's fairly sort of smooth. I haven't got the straightest stitch line. It looks good externally. Internally, not quite so hot, but it's okay. Right, so I've got the back portion of the shoe now made up and lined. So I just need to add the front portion. So what I'm going to be doing is gluing, positioning the front there. I'll be doing the same with the lining, and then my aim is to stitch through the whole lot all at one go. So what I've been doing is positioning the front piece onto the back piece and then taping it where it's lining up about right on the last. So my inside view is like this. What I can do now, if I put glue all around on the inside, I can hold these together ready for stitching. So I can get this quite nicely positioned here, draw these two bits together, and then get my tongue into position. Press it down and just check it's about right at the top. So this is my cylinder arm sewing machine, and I'm going to be using this one for any three-dimensional work. So basically anything that's not flat. And it's things like sewing the tongues in, and obviously sewing the front vamps onto the shoes, where you've got more of a three-dimensional object. I can get it around that cylinder and it should be alright. Obviously traditionally a shoemaker would be using a post bed sewing machine. I used to have one of those, but I don't anymore. So I had quite a clear out trying to make space as usual. Anyway, this machine will do it quite admirably. I've got a 110 needle in there, so a slightly fatter needle to get through more of the thicknesses of the leather without snapping the same thread, the NM40 thread. So I'll sew the tongues in next. So I'm just putting in some rows of stitches which will actually be hidden by the top layer. My flatbed, it would be a bit tricky to do this, so I do need something which lets me get into the sort of three-dimensional side of things. So I'm just applying the glue. I'll let that go off, and then I'll be pressing the front of the shoe onto this section. So this at the moment is just the outer levers. So I'm just looking inside the shoe at the moment. You can see I've got this outer now stuck down. On the inside, it's obviously the outside seams are all stuck. I have stuck this bit of lining along the same line. I'm now going to put in my toe lining, vamp and toe lining, and stick it down on this same line, and then I'll stitch it all. So the lining is free and floating at the back and totally free and floating at the front. It's just this seam where it will be secured. And that's now with the lining pressed into position. So I can sew this now and get it sewn, to get those seams on the outside here sewn, and that will secure everything. It is a lot more difficult not being able to see the wheel. Is far easier. This is a fairly small foot, but it is still quite tricky getting the stitch placement right. So next seam now, just making a start on that. I'm having to put my shoe lengthways each time down the arm, otherwise I wouldn't be able to get the turns that I need. If I had it heel way, the other way around, I wouldn't be managing this. As I say, ideally you'd have a post machine, but it's okay, I am getting there. If you're wondering what the screeching is, it's a servo motor. I've got it running very low, and servos like to be run quite fast unless they're particularly high quality ones, but that's why there's a bit of a noise in the background. Not saying it's perfect, but it's pretty okay actually, particularly as it's been done on a cylinder arm, not a wheel machine. Great. Get this glue off. This glue does fortunately wipe off the leather, which is good. I've done my final seams, so I have now got a pair of uppers, and there's not a left or right or anything at the moment, they're both the same, but once they get lasted they'll become left and right. That's what they look like on the inside with the lining. See you in the next film, and that will be sorting out the sole, so starting to do some work on the sole. I'm going to do it completely traditional, hand sewn, hand welted and wooden pegged, so traditional throughout. And if you haven't subscribed, please do, and you can see what I get up to. Okay then, thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.